So this is the final class, as I mentioned. We actually have a book for every family. Greg is passing them out. If you haven't got a book yet for your family, raise your hand and we'll get you one. Okay. So as Greg's going around, I'd like to ask, this class is on education, humanism versus Christian-based education. How many public educators do we have in the audience this morning? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, good, 8, 9. I just want to check and see who might be tar and feathering me before I get out of here today. As you all know, my wife and my son are both public educators, and they work in the school systems. And if you talk to any teacher, especially a Christian teacher, this is their mission. I hear stories around the dinner table about some of the children that they teach and the sad home lives that they have, and it'll bring a tear to your eyes. I look at it as a Christian educator is really our last stand against humanism in the public schools. Again, this is a mission for these people, and we do appreciate the work you do. And I don't have the flipper. Oh, thank you. Okay, there we go. This is a quote by Nelson Mandela. "Education is the most powerful weapon which can be used to change the world." And education is a powerful weapon that can change the world for the good and the bad. When government-supervised education began, the nation had a Christian social and cultural foundation. After 2 centuries, humanist ideology is largely responsible for the removal of Christian values from the nation's social and cultural foundations. I think about my lifetime, and I go back just 50 short years. Okay, 50 years that I can remember. How's that? The word gay meant something completely different than it does today. Gay was something that you're happy. The word affair was a party. Divorce was unheard of, and living together was very taboo. I can think of my family. Until my generation, there was never any divorce in our families. Until my generation. But my 13 cousins and brothers, 2 of the 13 have been through a divorce. And then there's a whole issue of transgender. Humanism is just creeping into our society, and we're losing good educators every day because of humanism. Choosing secular jobs rather than dealing with the politics. I know of one principal in the Fort Mill school system, retired rather than having to deal with the transgender bathroom issues. We're losing good people. We're losing good teachers. So how far have we fallen? The Pledge of Allegiance. Going back again 50 years, when I went to school, the first thing we did was said the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we recited the Lord's Prayer. This is a quote by Dwight D. Eisenhower when he made it mandatory to say the Pledge of Allegiance in school systems. Under one God was added by Eisenhower in 1954. Now there's a movement in our country to remove under one God. In fact, there are 4 states in this United States that they do not say the Pledge of Allegiance: Hawaii, Iowa, Vermont, and Wyoming. And West Virginia does not require students to participate in the pledge. My opinion, and this is my opinion, is that humanism is nullifying the influence of Christianity in society, in government, and in education, which will result in anarchy at some point. Schools are not being allowed to teach respect to the flag, respect to the government, and ultimately respect to God. So what is education? The process of receiving or giving systematic instruction, especially at a school or university. I can remember we had the 3 R's when we went to school, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. I had a neighbor that told me the 3 R's were racing, roller derby, and wrestling. But we've also added sciences and humanities. And it's through the sciences and humanities that humanism is creeping in. Humanism is becoming the established religion of schools and even most churches, for that matter, most of society. Christianity is progressively being excluded from government, from schools, and even church. It also has a very weak grip in society and modern life today. So what is education? This is a quote from the Philosophy of Humanism by Corliss Lamont. Humanist education naturally assents social rather than individualistic aims. This implies both more attention to social studies such as economics, politics including civil liberties, sociology, and inclusion in a curriculum of courses on ethics in order to train the youth of the nation in the broad humanist attitude of loyalty to the social group and to humanity. Humanism would also greatly extend the teaching of science and scientific methods, putting emphasis on the students' learning to think straight, but not neglecting the calculation of basic facts. There needs to be no opposition between science and humanities, for both of which the humanist draws inspiration, and no concentration upon one of them to the exclusion of the other. Compulsory public education has been supervised by civil governments since the early 19th century. From inception, it was dominated by ideals of secularism and statism, losing the Christian influence that founded this country. The biggest person that made the change in this is a guy named John Dewey. He's a psychologist that redesigned the American public schools to conform to humanistic philosophies and psychological methodologies. Now, John Dewey is not to be confused with Melvin Dewey, who created the Dewey Decimal System. That's just a little perk that you guys get this morning. Here's a quote by John Dewey. "Education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself." As I mentioned, Dewey is blamed for introducing humanism into the educational system. And you can see from this quote, there is no mention of God, that he's put the focus on man and education and nothing about God. John Adams said there are 2 educations. One should teach us how to make a living and the other how to live. And education is important to teaching us how to live or how to make a living. But God's important to help us on how we should live. And you can see the connection why education is so important to have that Christian factor. Comments? Ooh, quiet group, I'm in trouble. So I've got, as I taught the high school class last week, I said, I got 3 questions. There'll be a test at the end, and they're all true. So public education based on humanist ideology is largely responsible for removing Christian values from our social and cultural foundations. So I found basic principles of humanistic education principles. The first, students' learning should be self-directed. That means students can pick whatever they want to learn and go with it. Schools should produce students who want and to know how to learn. And the only form of meaningful evaluation is self-evaluation. Let's throw the grade scales out. Feeling as well as knowledge are important in the learning process, and students learn best in a non-threatening environment. Again, going back 50 years. We had a policy in my home that if I ever got a licking in school, a spanking, I get one twice as hard when I got home. I only ever got one. I never told my dad until I was 30-some years old. But again, they're taking away the structure in schools. They're taking away the accountability in schools, and they're not teaching ways to live in society. I missed the slide. Okay, there it is. I got it out of order. So here's an example of the Rock Hill school system. I know some of our kids and parents have children in there. They've just introduced a program that they're taking the whole way across the whole school district called PBIS, Positive Behavioral Intervention and Support. I didn't know how to do videos because they had a nice video that kind of went along with this, but it tells about what they're trying to do, and I'm just going to read some excerpts from the Rock Hill Herald. Rock Hill schools no longer put their main focus on punishing bad behavior. Instead, they're teaching students what is expected and rewarding them for following through. It's part of the Positive Behavioral Intervention and Supports, or PBIS. And said Nancy Turner, Director of Exceptional Education for the district. When students don't know math, we teach them math. When a student doesn't know reading, we teach them how to read. And however, if a student doesn't know how to behave, we traditionally punish them. And basically what they're doing now as far as punishment, so if 2 children got into a fight or 2 students or one's bullying another student, they're not going to punish these students. They're not going to send them into in-school suspension or send them home. They're going to sit them down and they're going to talk about their feelings. I don't see how that's going to work. Not true? That's
there are still punishments for bad behavior. But PBIS is kind of meant to keep bad things from happening to start with.
okay.
So it actually is very effective in our
Okay, because that wasn't what I read out of the article or got out of the news. Okay, so I'm wrong.
No, there are still logical consequences for behaviors. Behaviors are handled through administration. There's still suspensions. They have to log all kind of keep data about violations of behaviors, depending on what grade level you're talking about. But like Amanda said, this is a preventative system where we focus on the positive instead of always focusing on the one or two kids who don't know how to behave. It sucks up the education from the other 18 children. If there's only two, and you focus on the positive that's going on with the other 18, 95% of the time, the other two fall in line from conformity.
Okay. So I learned something. Like I said, when I read the article and saw the news clip, that's not what they conveyed. Because they were actually interviewing parents and they were all upset about this new system.
They just don't understand it either.
Okay. So,
That also works here.
What's that?
That also works here.
mm-hmm.
When you do that in a classroom, if you focus on the positive, then the ones that are doing the negative, a lot of times they'll fall in because they're not getting to participate.
Okay.
You just say, well, we're going to move on. You do your thing. We're going to move on. They, a lot of times will go, but I want to be a part of that. And we go, well, then you're going to have to act like you're supposed to act to be a part of that.
Okay. Well, if I was correct, and I'm not correct, my point was this is a place where humanism is sliding even further under these humanistic principles. But I've been corrected. So the next one is I found some principles on Christian education, Christian-based education. The first is the education of a child is the responsibility of the parent. Do we all agree with that? The education of our children is our responsibility. Deuteronomy 6:4-9, it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons and shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on your doorposts of your house and on your gates." Deuteronomy 11:18-21. "You shall therefore impress these words of mine on your heart and on your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be the frontals on your forehead. You shall teach them to your sons, talking of them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down and when you rise up. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your sons may be multiplied on the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, and to give them as long as the heavens remain above the earth." So you can see in these two scriptures, it is a parent's responsibility to teach our children. And we teach them day in and day out. When we sit down at meals, when we play together, when we work together. It's a parent's responsibility to teach children. Ephesians 6:4 says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instructions of the Lord." Any comments there? It is a quiet group. Okay. Second point is the education of the education of a child by a teacher will disciple those students found in their care. Again, it's important that a parent understands who's teaching their children, what they're teaching their children, and how they're teaching their children. I've heard, and I'm not sure where I've heard it, sometimes teachers can complain about overly involved parents. But a Christian parent must be involved to assure that their child is being trained correctly. In today's educational system, Christian values are not taught, but need to be taught in the home. Psalm 78:6-7. "That the generation to come might know, even the children yet to be born, that they may arise and tell them to their children, that they should put their confidence in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. Matthew 28:19-20. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I command you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of ages. It's important that we understand who's teaching our children, what they're teaching our children, and being involved in teaching, in that teaching. Comments on that? Okay. Well,
It goes to this, but to say your example earlier about the schools in Rock Hill, there's an example that might fit better in Charlotte Mecklenburg School District. We're starting to implement a program that's called Welcoming Schools. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's basically you welcome transgender, you welcome gay, any of that, but it's really, it's under the disguise of anti-bullying. That's what they're trying to promote, but it's pushing the transgender agenda onto the
okay.
children.
That program's called again?
Welcoming Schools.
Welcoming Schools. Charlotte Meck's got a program called Welcoming Schools, and again, it's under the umbrella of anti-bullying, but the focus is on not discriminating, but welcoming homosexuals and transgenders. The education of a child should be structured to provide an academic platform for success for the whole child. What do you think I mean by the whole child? Mind, body, and spirit. Preparing them for life and also eternity, right? Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Luke 2:40, the child continued to grow and become strong, increasing in wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. And in Luke 2:52, and Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature in favor of God and men. Again, we need to teach our children to strive to be like Christ, even as a child. In the education, the fourth point, the education of a child must be trained so that students will impact his own culture with eternity in mind, going back to the whole child.
I'm really excited about the new quarter with the child raising class, or whatever you want to call it. It's more important now than ever, because if you don't train if you don't train up your children in Christ and put that in them, the schools are going to take it out of them if you don't. So it's very important with all the kids coming up now that we learn how to train our children correctly.
So we got a train of trainers class coming. And Eric, you're teaching that next quarter, right? Yeah. So it's a parenting class, and it's going to be downstairs? Okay. So there's a parenting class downstairs if anybody that's interested. And it's important. That's why we hold these periodically for parents, is to help them raise their children. Any other comments?
I just have a couple of comments. First of all, PBIS has been around for a long time. It is not a new program. It's a behavioral program that districts buy. It's something that is sold. It's a product. And any kind of discipline within a classroom depends on consistency, as any parent knows. So any program will work if it's consistently used. Second of all, going back to public education, we have to understand that education is a government institute. We would not expect the government, as far as legislators go, to raise our children. As a public teacher, I know a child, the minute he walks in my classroom, that has been raised in a good family structure. The responsibility is not education, it is the family.
And we have to understand that. Education does what it can do to help kids grow as best they can. The ultimate responsibility is the parent. Until parents realize that, education is going to be whatever government dictates.
Well said.
Thank you.
Not going to argue with that. But the educators have a tough job, and they're faced with a lot of different things. And Kim's right. I mean, the responsibility is the home to raise children and provide moral values. Mark?
I think it's interesting, one of the mission points that we support is Eastern European missions. And the premise behind that, they're providing Bibles and literally providing Bibles to the school systems in the Eastern European countries that were formerly Soviet Union. And the school systems are asking to bring Bibles in so that they can teach ethics. Because over the course of the Soviet Union, when it was outlawed, religion was outlawed to some degree, the entire generation has moved away from any kind of ethical base. And now they're kind of going back to the Bible in order to develop that ethical base. So it's a fundamental ethics that they're starting to instill in a society, because they've gone that route for a couple of generations of getting away from the Bible, and that has not served them well. And we're going to be in the same boat before long.
Yeah, the crux of humanism is conforming to society. Now, who sets what society is the issue.
And I can also add to that, being in the Fort Mill school system for a long time, that I can guarantee you that probably 80 to 90% of administrators would love to go back to Bible ethics, but because we're such a litigious society, there has been some parents somewhere along the line that said you cannot do that. That has created that, because it boils down to whether you're going to sue the district or not. But if you would ask them on a professional or on a personal level, they would much rather go back to those social morals, but their hands are tied. Because again, it's a government society, it's a government entity.
Tommy?
Dave, I teach a college course at a university, and the students are they're all in their 20s, early 20s to late 20s. And it's amazing how probably 95% of them have no Bible knowledge whatsoever. Okay? Yeah, it starts in the home, but years ago, you used to also get it when you went to school. Now, they don't have that opportunity. So if it's not in the home, if the teaching of the Bible is not in the home, they're not getting it at all. And so that's the difference now, as opposed to what it used to be like when the country first started.
Well, you just ride to church in the mornings, and you see how many people aren't going to church. You take a look at the home structures, and divorce is rampant. Kids have step parents, and now we've got two mummies or two daddies, and I mean our society is just confusing our children, and it doesn't have that moral base. It doesn't have that Christian base.
But when it comes to education, we've taken that teaching of the scriptures and the moral foundation that's found in the scriptures out of education. The government has done that, whereas years ago that wasn't the case, and at least there was that foundation. So that shows how humanism has crept into education and taken God out of it.
Yeah, the issues with schools are not the schools themselves, but who we vote for. It's the family life that we have, and it's the society norms anymore that are set. And that's my last slide, but I agree 100%.
Back in 1962, I had a level 1 college prep world history class, and there was a large section in there about Moses. And I was really surprised that there was so much in my book.
That's another point that you see in a lot of the humanities. They will go out of their way to avoid talking about Christianity because of being sued or whatever, but yet they'll also slide in some things like Muslim, Buddhist, things like that are now part of the studying world cultures and things like that. But they, the books go out of the way, our government goes out of the way to avoid making Christianity, which the country was founded on, having any prevalence.
My neighbor started a program which has worked very well in Fort Mill. They bus the students away from the school if they can't talk the Bible in the school. They bus them away for an hour and to a local church, and they train them how to use the Bible. They teach them the historical values and ethical values and God's basic plan of redemption. And then they bus them back, and they get credit for it. It's acceptable by the government in this area, trying to get the same thing going in Rock Hill. It's a wonderful way to get children educated how to use the scriptures. They won't allow it to happen at the school. They have to take away, but they give them credit for it. So that's something you can look into. I can get cards from my neighbor. If you want, your child is in the public high school system or grammar school, they can go to those classes.
That's an interesting program. Any other?
So if you're a teacher, no matter what grade you teach, because it's a government institution, you are given a set of standards that you have to cover. And your job is to cover those standards. So my middle schoolers are learning about Buddhist, Hinduist, Muslim, and there's also a portion of Christianity. There's nothing wrong with knowing about other things existing in the world. The problem I have is, I don't know the percentage, but I think a large amount of teachers went into education because they love children. And we can't be the example to those children. These parents, they send us the best they have. And they are broken, and the family structure's not there. We have all this, and we know all this, but what we need to be doing is bringing in those families to learn about what God expects us to do. So we teach the standards because we have to. But that does not mean that I can't go in and show a child how to be loving, how to have compassion, how to be forgiving, how to be like Jesus. And I try my best to do that every day.
Do you see this as your mission?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't make you cry.
I just don't want you to, I don't want you to think that all teachers, I don't think all teachers' goal is to create a bunch of humanists. I think a lot of teachers have their hands tied, but they do what they can. They lead by example. You can't preach God and you can't preach Jesus, but you can be God and you can be Jesus.
Absolutely. It's living by example. I know. Go ahead.
It's the Corliss, I can't remember the name, Corliss quote that you had up early in the slide presentation. I was thinking, he presents humanism as this sort of egalitarian thing where we're all about the society, but I see humanism as being a very self-centered thing at its root. And it's like they're in denial as to what they really are. But there are a lot of moving parts in our culture, and it's hard to say which came first. Was it humanism that created the problems that we have, or were there certain problems already occurring that allowed humanism to get a foothold? Is humanism the cause, or is it a tool? All of this is very gray, and you can't understand necessarily what's the piece that's most important. So when you have that situation to sit and say, well, you're an elementary school teacher and you have to be responsible for fixing the situation. Nobody says that. But I think we as Christians have abdicated our responsibility to stand up to that tie, right? So you mentioned early on, there's a principal who has retired from his position rather than take a firm stand in what he thinks is going to be not necessarily an unpopular position, but an unsupported position. Why did he feel unsupported? Because he knew the people that are sat right here in this congregation today were going to read the story in the newspaper and say, I don't like that, and go to work and do whatever it is they do and show back up here at the next service. As opposed to if he puts a line in the sand that says, no, that's not happening at my school, we're there to support it. We don't support the people that support our point of view.
It goes back to what you say, though. There's standards, and it's not necessarily the school systems, it's the government,
Who's the government?
the people we elect.
Exactly.
The people we
We
elect.
don't stand up for what we believe in. We don't make our voices heard. We sit quietly, we're very, very kind, we're very patient, we're loving, and we're caring, and we don't want to be boxed as hateful. We've allowed that tool to silence us.
Absolutely. Francis?
We have to watch who we elect.
I'm sorry?
We have to watch who we elect, not to get political.
Absolutely, absolutely. And politicians base their decisions on what? Who's going to vote them in? Who do they most? Oh my, I'm never going to get done. Go ahead, right here.
Okay, he was talking about his neighbor and about how they're getting credit for taking their children out and going to a church and learning about the Bible. Well, it really sounds wonderful. However, that would give how would we feel if our children were taken to a Muslim mosque or whatever? Because in this country, we should have the right to do that also. So while it's acceptable in one area that we really love, are we going to open a door where our children are being exposed to something we do not like, and then again, the vast majority stay quiet because they don't want?
We choose as parents to allow them to go to this church to participate or not. So there are plenty of children in my elementary child's school room that choose not to go. But as a choice, we sign a waiver and he is allowed to go. So if there's a Muslim choice or a Hindu choice, my answer would be no.
Okay, thank you for that.
The teachers here aren't on trial. You know, I think everybody here, we support you as teachers. It's kind of, the ones that we're looking at are the humanists. The ones that teach that I'm right and it's my opinion, and you need to convert to my opinion. Or the ones that are teaching that the book that you read that says this child had two moms or two daddies. You know, the ones that are in there to change what our country has been founded on. And the problem is the kids sometimes are taught at home. That they go to school and they meet the teacher that it's just a job to them, or they're tired and cranky and don't care about the kids anymore, or they're there to change, whether it's the biblical side or the humanist side. And the kids have a choice. And today we're given a lot more choices because of the humanism that are in our school, and our kids are choosing to go different ways, and we don't know how to deal with that. So the underlying problem is, how do we get our society and our kids to focus back on Christianity and God?
You know, it is correct in some degree, I think, to blame the government for the state of schools, but I think it's also probably more accurate to blame the people in the school system, like the parents and people in the community. You know, I was a senior in high school 9 years ago, which seems like a pretty long time ago now, but I lived in Mumford, Alabama, Talladega County school system. 100% of the people in my school had been to church at some time. Probably 75% went to church on a regular basis, at least once a week. And I don't think that we would ever have had these kind of problems because people in our school system would not have raised a fuss about anything. I remember being in science, in biology class, and my teacher, Mr. Jones, he got to a particular part of the semester we're supposed to be talking about evolution. And she got up in front of the class and said, I'm supposed to teach about evolution here, but I don't believe in it, so we're going to skip it. And that was how stuff went down in my school, because that's what the people in my school system believed in and how they treated things. So if you don't have a community that's going to raise a fuss about things like that, then you're not going to have a problem. So, like I said, it is easy to place the blame on the government, but I think you can place the blame on the community as well, and how the community feels about education.
Okay. One last one, then I got to get moving on. I got 2 minutes.
Okay, and this is not going to sit well with most of you, but why, it seems like these conversations that we're having here about all of this should be done in groups outside of here. It seems to me like we should be having more scriptural teaching to us so that we can do it in our homes to our children.
Yeah, this is. I know you're visiting, but this is a very unique class that we're having right now. We're touching upon humanism in various aspects of society and life, and this is just one aspect of it where humanism has creeped in and displaced Christian norms that we've had in the past over the last 200 years. So this is what this class is about.
Yeah, it just seems that we all already know all of that. And
Okay.
thank you, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Okay. Just a couple things here real quick. So Christian education aims to put a knowledge of God, a biblical understanding of human relations to God and man, and acceptance of both special and natural revelations, human submission to God, biblical morality, and self-government in accordance to God's word. It aims to educate both the physical and the natures of man. The humanist aims to promote secularism and socialization of the child, rejects supernaturalism, and insists on naturalness, equality, and self-sufficiency of mankind. And it promotes materialism, feminism, hedonism, multiculturalism, and diversity. And it aims to educate only the physical nature of the mankind, since human beings do not have a spiritual nature. I got to flip that. I'm out of time. So I'm just going to close with this last slide. You missed all the good stuff. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Going back to evolution. Again, you look at government. We've talked about this. We elect, a Secretary of Education in the state of South Carolina. I'm not sure all states are that way. But people do anything for a vote. Jeff talked a couple weeks ago about politics, where politicians, there's a huge moral decay in politicians, and we've seen this over the last couple weeks in the behavior of some of our politicians. Again, they're not going they're not going to stand for anything that's moral, or a lot of them won't. We've seen the deterioration of the family unit. We've talked about that already. The degradation of morality in society. I'm just saying the state education, this is my opinion, the state education system is a byproduct that is now the vehicle that helps perpetuate humanism. We see humanism continue to creep in standards. I had a standard in here, if I can find it real quick. There it is. Again, you see in the red that talks about evolution. Just like it was mentioned over here that, evolution, it's evolution, it's evolution. Teachers have to teach these things. It's a standard. It's just like going to work. I work in a factory. I think I'm done. If you don't wear safety glasses, if you don't wear steel-toed shoes, if you don't wear hearing protection, you're not going to have a job. And they have to teach these standards, but they also, I give a lot of credence and credibility to our teachers. There's a lot of loving teachers out there in the public school system, and this is their mission to help children. So thank you everybody for your comments.